What happened behind the scenes of The Twilight Zone was literally illegal. 3 people died. In the early morning hours of July 23, 1982, director John Landis was focused on nothing but realism. He was prepared to film a key scene for Time Out, his segment of Twilight Zone the movie. In this sequence, the main character has to save 2 children during a helicopter attack in the Vietnam War. It is the only way he can find redemption for his racist behavior. Landis called in the 3 actors involved, a veteran performer and 2 inexperienced children. He shouted, "Action!" but everything went horribly wrong. In 1982, John Landis and Steven Spielberg were the kings of Hollywood. They were untouchable, and they teamed up to create the definitive sci-fi movie, The Twilight Zone. But in the early hours of July 23rd, Landis's ambition came at a devastating cost. To get the perfect shot, he broke labor laws, illegally hired 2 children, and ordered them to stand directly under a real helicopter and live explosions. In an instant, the film set turned into a crime scene. 3 people lost their lives, the director was put on trial, and Hollywood was changed forever. If you're a fan of Twilight Zone, I recommend putting this video on your TV and getting comfortable. Today, we're going to uncover everything that happened behind the greatest act of negligence in cinema history. This story involves many names, but it centers around just one: John Landis. On September 3, 1986, Landis arrived at the Los Angeles Superior Court. He was immediately surrounded by a sea of journalists and cameras, all desperate for a statement. An outsider might have thought he was about to film a movie, and that the press was hungry for details on the plot, the stars, and the release date. But the reality was very different. The director and several other defendants were preparing to face a long and highly publicized trial. It was a situation that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. In the early 80s, Landis was one of the most successful directors in the world. In just a few years, he delivered a string of hits that dominated the box office and set the pulse of popular culture. He went from the college comedy Animal House to the musical comedy The Blues Brothers, and from there to the blend of horror and comedy in An American Werewolf in London. His energy, pop culture sensibilities, and ability to mix genres elevated him to the very top of Hollywood. He became a magnet for the major studios, and he knew it. Rather than hiding his ambitions, he was looking for the project that would finally cement his status as one of the titans of modern cinema. He believed he found that opportunity thanks to one of his newest friends, a man he had given a cameo to in The Blues Brothers, Steven Spielberg. Landis had no idea it would be the beginning of his downfall. By 1981, Spielberg was a Hollywood heavyweight. Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Raiders of the Lost Ark had earned him the nickname the King Midas of Hollywood. Everything he filmed turned into a success. Everyone in the industry was desperate for his magic touch. Landis was no exception. He eagerly took the call from Spielberg, who told him about his recent meeting with Terry Semel, the president of Warner Bros. They had started discussing various projects until the executive mentioned that they held the rights to The Twilight Zone. But what exactly was The Twilight Zone? Between 1959 and 1964, it was the most important series dedicated to the fantasy genre. In self-contained half-hour episodes, different stories of horror, fantasy, and science fiction served as a vehicle to discuss political, social, and religious themes with a moral lesson. And that wasn't all. The quality of the writing and production allowed it to become a massive hit, even among those who didn't typically consume those types of shows. It quickly became a cultural phenomenon, influencing a new generation of creatives. To give you an idea, if it weren't for The Twilight Zone, we wouldn't have Black Mirror today. Landis was left speechless. He had grown up loving The Twilight Zone. Spielberg felt the same way, which is why he had arranged with the president of Warner Bros. To make a movie based on the series. It would be composed of 4 stories, each handled by a different director. He had already hired Joe Dante, who was trained in Roger Corman's low-budget cinema and was coming off of Piranha and The Howling. He also brought in the Australian George Miller, the man behind the Mad Max saga. But Spielberg said nothing excited him more than having his friend Landis on board. And Landis didn't hesitate. This was the project he wanted to embark on to achieve true greatness. At the same time, he would be paying tribute to the series he adored. And as if that weren't enough, he would be sharing another project with the King Midas of Hollywood. With 2 of the highest-grossing directors attached, Twilight Zone the movie became the most anticipated film of the era. Landis was so enthusiastic that he didn't want to be just another director. He wanted to have as much weight as Spielberg. During the first meeting, he proposed that the movie should open with a short film serving as a prologue. It would show 2 friends driving down a road at night, talking about their favorite episodes of the series, until one of them turns into a monster. Spielberg loved the proposal and Landis's level of commitment. That's why he suggested to Warner that Landis should be a producer alongside him. Semel also valued Landis, so he gave his approval. Now, with more power over The Twilight Zone, Landis pushed for even more initiatives. He noted that Spielberg, Dante, Dante and Miller were doing remakes of classic episodes. But he didn't want to limit himself to that. Instead, he decided to write an original short script, albeit inspired by Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol. He titled it Time Out, and it never crossed his mind what it would eventually lead to. The story stars Bill Connors, a middle-aged American man. He goes to a bar and complains about losing a promotion to a Jewish man. He then spews racist comments against Jewish, Asian, and black people. But when he leaves the bar, he is transported to several different and very specific time periods: Nazi-occupied France, the American South during the height of the Ku Klux Klan, and the Vietnam War. In each situation, he is hunted by white men just like himself, who now see him as one of the very minorities he so bitterly rejected. Time Out fascinated Spielberg. He felt that while it was a new story, it remained faithful to the spirit of the original series. Semmel liked it too, but he had his reservations. He felt Connors was too negative and bigoted of a character. For the audience to care about him, he needed some quality that humanized him. Landis agreed and rewrote the ending. In the new version, when he appears in Vietnam, Connors flees from American soldiers and a helicopter firing at him. In a village, he finds two Vietnamese children in danger. Moved, he picks them up to rescue them, crosses a river with them, and tells them, "I'll keep you safe, kids. I swear to God." For those who know how this story ends, those lines can only be described as chilling. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Spielberg liked this new version even more, and it satisfied Semmel. Now the protagonist managed to find redemption. He also allocated a budget of $10 million for the entire film, a generous amount for the early 80s. Additionally, he allowed each director to work with their own team. Landis called his partner, who would also become a key figure in this story, George Folsey Jr. He started as an editor on Landis's films before becoming a producer. If Landis needed a piece of the planet Mars, Folsey would get it for him. John Landis was satisfied with the importance he had gained in the production of The Twilight Zone. Now it was time to find the perfect actor for Time Out, without imagining he would be responsible for his macabre fate. The director was looking for a screen veteran with a strong personality, and he quickly thought of Vic Morrow. Morrow first gained popularity in 1955, playing a juvenile delinquent in the film Blackboard Jungle. From there, he worked non-stop in both film and television. It was on the small screen where he truly established himself with the series Combat. In this World War II drama, he immortalized the character of Sergeant Chip Saunders. For years, he enjoyed fame and fortune until his career began to stall. He eventually had to settle for guest starring roles in other series and low-budget productions. When work dried up in the United States, he had to accept offers for spaghetti westerns and other European exploitation films. Quentin Tarantino has noted that Rick Dalton, Leonardo DiCaprio's character in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, shares several characteristics with Morrow. By the early 80s, Morrow was making do with the few offers he received when Landis contacted him. At first, he wasn't sure. He was fed up with the industry and was considering quitting acting altogether. It was his daughter Carrie who convinced him to accept the part. She explained that The Twilight Zone was a major production based on a hit series with Spielberg as its most visible figure. Morrow reconsidered. It had been years since anyone from Hollywood had called him, and if Spielberg was the new King Midas, it could help him relaunch his career. A few days later, Morrow met with the team behind The Twilight Zone. Landis talked to him about the project and the character. The actor agreed and signed the contract immediately. In record time, Time Out had its Bill Connors. With his star on board, Landis had to select the rest of the cast, including the Vietnamese children. This marked the beginning of the end for the project for Landis and for Old Hollywood. To complete the cast, Landis and Folsey met with Michael Fenton and Marcy Lyroff, the casting agents hired by Warner Bros. There were no issues selecting actors for most of the scenes. However, upon reviewing the script, Fenton and Lyroff noticed that the two Vietnamese children appeared in a night scene. They reminded the director that California had strict child labor laws, the most significant of which prohibited minors from working at night. If night work was essential for the production, a special permit and the presence of a social worker were required. Fenton also mentioned that the scene appeared quite dangerous. Furthermore, he noted that since the children had no dialogue, they would be classified as extras, meaning the casting agency could not officially hire them. Years later, Lyroff admitted her colleague used that technicality to avoid involving the agency in something that could endanger its reputation. The meeting with Fenton and Lyroff left Landis deep in thought. He loved The Twilight Zone, but he had no patience for the bureaucracy of Hollywood, yet this was the project of a lifetime. The one that would place him on equal footing with his friend Spielberg as both a filmmaker and a businessman. If he couldn't find two children for Time Out, the segment he created and his status on the film would be called into question. Landis discussed the situation with Folsey and two other crew members who would eventually be linked to the tragedy. unit production manager and assistant director Dan Aykroyd, and second assistant director Anderson House. When discussing how to film the rescue sequence, Landis made it very clear that he would not use mannequins or small-statured stunt doubles for the children. He insisted on real Asian children. Although the story belonged to the fantasy genre, he sought absolute realism. Nothing could look fake, as it would ruin his vision. Following that meeting, House remained uneasy. A few days later, he expressed his reservations to Aykroyd about working with children outside of legal hours, near a helicopter and special effects explosives. Knowing Aykroyd had held more meetings with the director, House asked if they were considering filming the rescue during the day and simulating night. Aykroyd stated they would only shoot at night and advised him not to push other ideas. He also mentioned he had recommended hiring Paul Stewart, an experienced special effects technician who had actually worked with Morrow on Combat. While his assistants debated, Landis wanted to finalize the hiring of the children as soon as possible. The logical step would have been to process waivers to allow minors to work so late, but he never did. He didn't go through a talent agency either. Instead, he met with Folsey and they agreed to find 2 Asian children on their own. Landis also requested absolute discretion. Because of this, they did not discuss the matter with Warner executives or with Spielberg. Also, those superiors did not supervise Landis's work, as each segment functioned as an independent island with its own lead. Based on the script and Landis's directives, Folsey soon located the children. Unable to use an agency, he spoke with Donna Schumann, his production secretary. Her husband, Dr. Harold Schumann, often worked with Asian people, so Folsey asked for his help. Dr. Schumann called a former associate, Dr. Peter Chen, and told him friends were looking for 2 Asian children for a movie. In turn, Chen called his brother Mark, who had a 6-year-old daughter named Renee Xin-Yi Chen. Mark discussed the idea with his wife, Cheyenne Hui, and the girl, who was thrilled at the idea of acting in a film. Cheyenne Hui also liked the possibility, thinking it would be a wonderful experience for her daughter. Folsey managed to get Dr. Schumann to help him find the other child as well. The doctor contacted his colleague Daniel Lee and his wife Kim Hoa. They had a 7-year-old son named Micah Din Lee. He was an outgoing boy, and when they told him he could be in a movie, he was overjoyed. Landis was delighted with Renee and Micah Din Lee. They were adorable, and he believed the audience would be moved when Connors saved them from hell. However, they did not know that the hell would be real, and no one would be able to save them. The filming of the movie began in early 1982. Warner Bros. Established a production schedule that put Landis's segment first. He had no issues directing the prologue, which was completed in just a few days. However, everyone knew that Time Out would require a much more complex logistical effort. In fact, it was the most heavily produced of the 4 segments. This might have unsettled another filmmaker, but Landis was overflowing with confidence. He was part of a dream project alongside his close friend Spielberg, backed by one of Hollywood's top studios. What could go wrong? Filming for Time Out started in mid-1982. Landis shot each sequence almost in chronological order: the bar, Nazi-occupied France, and the Ku Klux Klan. Throughout these scenes, the director had the constant support of Folsey, Aykroyd, House, and Stewart, along with a positive attitude from Morrow. He noticed the actor was happy to be part of a major production and was anticipating a success that would lead to more and better roles. In the final week, Landis and his crew focused on the Vietnam sequence. To film these scenes, they moved to Indian Dunes, a California ranch used for various movies and series. There, it was possible to recreate a Vietnamese village in the middle of a jungle and deploy pyrotechnic special effects. Also, the location allowed for night filming. By the time they reached this stage, tensions were high. Landis always involved himself deeply in his films, but this time he went further. He was obsessed with realism and didn't care what he had to do to achieve it. Keep in mind that with the illegal casting of the children, he was already committing a crime. On set, Landis behaved like a dictator. In the early scenes, the actors playing soldiers were supposed to fire at a banana plant, but he immediately yelled, "Cut." He felt the blanks didn't create a convincing enough impact. He then demanded the use of real ammunition. The effects department told him that live rounds should never be on a set because it eliminates the safety factor. Landis insisted everything would be fine and moved forward with his idea. Just as they were about to film the gunfire, a furious Morrow halted the production. He stated that he had always hated guns and only tolerated them for work, but he would absolutely not stand for the use of real bullets. The director, aware of his own powers of persuasion, took the actor aside and explained the importance of the scene, the segment, and the entire movie. He also reminded him how vital the project would be for revitalizing his career. Now calmer, Morrow agreed and accepted a return to work. Amidst the push for realism and mounting tension, Landis began falling behind schedule, a miscalculation that could have worried Spielberg and Warner Bros. Consequently, he rushed the scenes until only the final 2 days remained to film the rescue sequence. On July 22, 1982, the director and his crew began preparing the sequence. While the technicians set everything up, Folsey arrived with Renee and Micah Din Lee. The girl was accompanied by her parents, while the boy arrived with his mother. The young actors were brought to Landis, who by that point was once again stressed and worried about the delays. He looked them over and decided they needed to look more realistic, so he smeared them with mud from the set and tore holes in their costumes. With everything ready, Landis filmed the shots where Connors first encounters the children. It was very late, the air was cold, and the children had never been on a film set before. Despite their enthusiasm, they were overwhelmed by the cameras, the crowds, and the massive production. The director didn't pay much attention to them as he was focused on the technical aspects. Instead, Morrow comforted them. To lift their spirits, he made funny faces at them. Chen and Lee laughed out loud, even when it was time to film at 2 a.m. Landis had to cut the scene and asked them to stop laughing, but he was unsuccessful and had to do several takes. It took an hour and a half to get the shots he wanted. After Landis finished those scenes, Chen's parents and Lee's mother received envelopes containing $500. Landis and Folsey had agreed to pay them using the production's petty cash, as they were not on the official payroll. Also, the producer informed them that they would need the children again the following night. It was time to film the helicopter sequence, the last one our protagonist would ever see. The fateful day started off on the wrong foot. At 9:30 p.m., Landis called for Morrow, Renee, and Micah Din Lee. They were first scheduled to film a scene where the children are in a bamboo hut, and Connors has to grab them by the arms to cross a river while escaping a bombing. The director began filming when suddenly a water bomb exploded near the actors. Renee started crying, saying she had gotten dust in her eyes. Landis rushed over to comfort her, but he managed to finish the take. Behind the monitor, the girl's worried mother asked Folsey if it was dangerous. The producer reassured her, saying it was just a loud noise and that the kids would be fine. Now, it was time to film a wide shot of Connors rescuing the children across the river while fleeing from the helicopter. The camera and special effects crews prepared everything according to Landis's instructions, but no one was sure how it would work. The mortars firing the explosions were positioned under the huts on the set. Additionally, there was debris that the helicopter could hit if it flew too low. Everything was wrong. House was just as worried as he had been the first time, but he got no reaction from Allingham. Despite everything, no one tried to warn Landis. They knew he wouldn't listen. Later on, House would be the first to point the finger at the director in court and reveal the whole truth about that night. But that was still a few years away. Back on set, the crew's doubts spread to Morrow. While the kids rested in a trailer, he spoke with Stewart, the special effects technician. Both concluded that this sequence was riskier than any they had done for combat. Then the actor approached Dorsey Wingo, the veteran pilot who would be flying a Bell UH-1B Iroquois. He was also uneasy and hoped the explosion effects wouldn't damage his aircraft. In the middle of this uncertain atmosphere, Landis began directing the rest of the sequence at 11:30 p.m. First, he had to get a shot of the helicopter heading toward the Vietnamese village. The effects team detonated the bombs, and flames immediately flew toward the helicopter. Sparks hit the windshield, and Wingo felt the heat, so he stuck his head out the window to shout his complaints. There were firefighters on set, but none were authorized to act yet. As soon as he could land, the pilot told Allingham that the explosions should not happen near him. The assistant agreed and spoke with Landis. This could have ended the day, or convinced the director to film the scene differently. But Landis didn't flinch. He only cared about the movie. With a smile, he said, "You haven't seen anything yet," and called for the actors for the rescue shot. As soon as the children approached the set, Folsey spoke with their parents. He told them that if any firefighters approached, they shouldn't mention they were part of the production. Instead, they were to say they were his friends and were there to help him. Because of this, they were not to reveal anything about the money or the children's work. The parents agreed, but Daniel Lee did not hide his fear. Being Vietnamese, the set reminded him of the ordeal of war, and he asked if filming with the helicopter would be dangerous. Folsey assured him that everything was under control. At 2:20 a.m. on July 23, 1982, Landis began filming the scene. His ambition was so great that he used 6 cameras, including one inside the helicopter. Morrow then stepped into knee-deep water, holding a child under each arm. The director grabbed his megaphone and yelled to the helicopter, "Lower, lower, lower," and then ordered, "Fire, fire, fire." At that moment, one special effects technician activated simulated gunfire hitting the water, while another detonated explosions at the back of the village. A fireball erupted and Wingo again struggled to fly. He tried to descend, but two charges detonated together right beneath the helicopter. Wingo lost control. The vehicle began to spin and lose altitude. In the water, Morrow could not hold onto Renee, who fell and was crushed by the helicopter's right landing gear. Instantly, the veteran actor and Lee were struck by the main rotor blades. It was all over for them. At first, no one around realized what had happened. Landis shouted through his megaphone that they were finished and everyone could go home. Then the piercing screams of the girl's mother and the boy's father rang out. Technicians and firefighters immediately rushed to the helicopter. They were horrified to find that Vic Morrow, Renee Shin-Yi Chen, and Micah Din Lee had lost their lives. Wingo miraculously survived. Everyone was in shock, including Allingham, Stewart, House, Folsey, and Landis. A massive tragedy had just occurred, and its consequences had not even begun. The tragedy on the set of Twilight Zone shocked both Hollywood and the entire world. The media focused heavily on Morrow, as he was the first major star to die while filming a scene. The other center of conversation was Landis. He went from being the industry's golden boy to being at the center of a firestorm. He thought of Spielberg, his friend, the King Midas of Hollywood, and the man who had brought him onto the project. He had failed him and wanted to offer some kind of explanation. He tried calling him at his office and his home, but no one ever answered his calls. Despite this, Landis did not go into hiding. He and Folsey attended Morrow's funeral, where they gave short speeches. The director said, "Tragedy can happen in an instant, but cinema is immortal. Vic lives forever." Right before the final take, Vic took me aside to thank me for the chance to play this role. Everyone present found his words to be self-serving. Nevertheless, Landis also attended the funerals of Chen and Lee, where he received a cold reception from their families. Landis was not surprised when Warner Bros. Suspended the production of The Twilight Zone. He also kept up with the start of an investigation that moved in 3 different directions. Federal specialists analyzed the wreckage of the helicopter, radio recordings, and Wingo's testimony to determine if the pyrotechnic explosion had caused the pilot to lose control of the aircraft. At the same time, Los Angeles prosecutors began reconstructing the chain of command on set, looking into who authorized the scene and which warnings were ignored. In parallel, California labor safety inspectors intervened. They discovered that the children had been hired clandestinely, bypassing all protocols regarding minors working on a film set. The inevitable consequences were closing in on our protagonists. While investigators gathered evidence, Warner Bros., Landis, and Spielberg were hit with multi-million-dollar lawsuits from the victims' families. The studio's lawyers managed to settle with the parents of Renee and Lee. Morrow's case was more complicated. He had been a beloved figure in Hollywood. The plaintiffs there were his 2 daughters, Carrie and actress Jennifer Jason Leigh. They reached a settlement after a year, the terms of which were never disclosed, though it was known that Carrie continued to regret convincing her father to take the job. But Landis wasn't going to get off that easily. Sometime later, he was informed that the prosecution believed there was enough evidence to bring criminal charges against him and others responsible for time out. Consequently, the director Folsey, Allingham, Stewart, and Wingo were formally charged with involuntary manslaughter. These charges included the negligent management of the set, safety regulation violations, and the violation of labor laws by filming with children without permits. Landis and the others pleaded not guilty, and the filmmaker attempted to have the case dismissed. He worked closely with his lawyer to avoid an immediate trial, leading to legal disputes that lasted for several months. We'll get to that soon, but first, we need to cover what happened with the production of Twilight Zone. For several weeks, Landis was on heavy medication. To make matters worse, Spielberg was now avoiding him. He was alone. One day he received a call. He answered quickly, thinking it was his friend, but it was Semmel. He was also affected by the tragedy, but he decided to move forward with The Twilight Zone. Spielberg remained the most powerful brand on the project, and he couldn't afford to miss a golden opportunity. The project would not be canceled under any circumstances. Not even death could stop an executive's ambition. Also, he reasoned that the accident wasn't the fault of any of them, and that the movie could survive the horror. He had no idea how wrong he was. Landis wasn't sure about returning to Time Out. Semmel gave him time to think while Spielberg, Dante, and Miller directed their segments. It hurt Landis to learn that his friend, or former friend, was doing his work without enthusiasm, only to fulfill the contract. Landis felt he shouldn't abandon the project or Spielberg, even if they weren't speaking. Besides, he told himself it would be a farewell letter to Morrow. He returned to the Warner offices and reviewed the footage, where he came across the tragic accident. He quickly discarded it, though the studio preserved it at the request of lawyers. To give the segment closure, Landis used shots from scenes set during World War II. Now, Connors is caught by the SS and taken on a train to a concentration camp. There would be no redemption for Connors, but would there be any for Landis? Many thought no one in Hollywood would ever hire him again. However, he was soon back in charge of a set. He directed the music video for Michael Jackson's Thriller and other star-studded films. Folsey accompanied him on these projects. Many questioned the lack of punishment for the director and producer, accusing Hollywood of prioritizing business. While Landis resumed his career, Twilight Zone premiered on June 23, 1983. Reviews were mixed, pointing to Time Out as the weakest segment. Nevertheless, public morbid curiosity was intense. It grossed $42 million against a $10 million budget. Still, none of those responsible celebrated. In fact, a trial was looming that would change all of Hollywood. The trial regarding the tragedy on the set of Twilight Zone began on September 3, 1986. Regardless of the eventual verdict, it had already set a precedent in Hollywood. It was the first time in history that a film director and his crew were criminally prosecuted for an accident on a movie set. Landis, Folsey, Allingham, Stewart, and Wingo took their places in the defendant's dock. They maintained their innocence, but the director knew that justice would now have the final word. Also, cameras filled the courtroom, and most were pointed directly at him. He was gaining a type of notoriety he had never sought. First, the prosecution, represented by Leah Purwin D'Agostino, addressed the court. She argued that production decisions had created a negligent environment on set, specifically citing the illegal use of minors and the dangerous proximity of the helicopter to pyrotechnic explosions. To support the charges, D'Agostino called over 70 witnesses. The most powerful testimony came from the technical crew of Time Out. As previously mentioned, House served as a key witness, speaking bluntly as he revealed every one of his insecurities from day one. The assistant provided details on how Landis insisted on working with children, despite the risks involved in the scene. He even suggested that the director was aware he was breaking the rules and cared more about the film than safety or the law. Other crew members present on set recounted Landis's arrogance and the incompetence of the other defendants. As the witnesses continued to testify, the parents of Renee and Micah Din took the stand. Through tears, they admitted the illegality of the arrangements, but stated that neither Folsey nor anyone else in the production warned them the sequence would be so dangerous. In fact, no one had mentioned there would be a helicopter. Had they known, they would not have exposed their children for all the money in the world. For his part, Harold Schumann claimed he had told the parents the children would be working at night and that there would be explosions, but not near the minors. As the witnesses passed through the stand, Landis observed and listened while maintaining his composure. He noted that Folsey, Allingham, Stewart, and Wingo maintained a similar attitude. The director was surprised when the judge authorized the jury to visit Indian Dunes, the site of the tragedy. The visit took place on October 1, 1986, under strict rules. Jurors could not speak to each other or ask questions of lawyers or witnesses while touring the grounds. Landis and the other defendants were also permitted to attend, but maintained a cautious distance from the rest of the group. For the filmmaker, it was uncomfortable to once again set foot on the stage that had destroyed his reputation. After 5 months, D'Agostino concluded the prosecution's case, making way for the defense. Landis and the other defendants turned to James Neal, the former prosecutor of the Watergate case. His argument centered on the idea that the accident was a tragic combination of unforeseeable factors and that none of his clients had acted with criminal negligence. Following each presentation, he emphasized that the director and his team were devastated. Landis followed every piece of evidence and testimony presented by Neal closely. But one day, the lawyer told him that he should also testify in his own defense. The director was unsure, as this was an unusual move for a defendant in such a high-profile criminal case. However, the lawyer insisted it would allow the jury to see his human side, which was crucial for countering the image of the arrogant dictator established by the prosecution and the technicians. On February 19, 1987, Landis took the stand. He admitted he had broken the law by hiring children to work in the early morning hours without permits, calling the decision a mistake and stupid. However, he added that this was not the direct cause of the accident, and stated that he had spoken with the parents about the helicopter. He also claimed that no one on set, neither the pilot nor the experts, had warned him that filming the sequence would be dangerous. Also, he appeared sorrowful several times and cried while speaking about Morrow. Landis's words seemed to help shift his image in the eyes of those present, but he still had to face a cross-examination by D'Agostino. She asked questions intended to reveal his obsession with the perfect shot and his disregard for safety. The director managed to answer some questions and evade others while maintaining a remorseful tone. Between testimonies and evidence, the trial for the Twilight Zone tragedy lasted 10 months. Finally, on May 29, 1987, after 9 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Landis, Folsey, Allingham, Stewart, and Wingo were found not guilty. The director thanked the jury and stated that the fatal accident had marked his life forever. The trial that had kept Hollywood on edge was over, ending with a resolution that sparked widespread controversy. But the consequences of what happened on that set were only just beginning. Those responsible for the Twilight Zone tragedy avoided prison, but their lives and careers were never the same. John Landis was able to keep working in Hollywood, but without the status he once aspired to. He focused on comedies with little impact until the major studios eventually stopped calling. For a large part of the industry, he became a pariah, though he remains well regarded by dedicated film buffs. George Folsey continued working in Hollywood, primarily as an editor, his original profession, until his passing in 2024. Dan Aykroyd transitioned mainly to television, taking on logistical management roles. Dan Stewart maintained his status as a special effects veteran. As for Dorsey Wingo, in 2010 he published the book The Rise and Fall of Captain Methane, Autobiography of a Maverick, where he shares his version of the accident and how he has had to cope with it. Finally, there is Steven Spielberg. He was never implicated in the tragedy, nor did he have to answer to the law, yet he was deeply affected. He distanced himself from Semmel and, most notably, cut off his relationship with Landis. He was able to continue his career without issue, eventually cementing his status as the giant he is today. Even so, he never forgot the fateful accident that claimed the lives of Vic Morrow, Renee, and Micah Din Lee. Years later, he stated that no one deserves to lose their life for a movie. The tragedy on the set of The Twilight Zone also changed Hollywood forever. It convinced executives that safety is the most important factor on a set, especially in major blockbusters. This led to the emergence of risk prevention specialists with the authority to halt a production if conditions are not optimal. Additionally, the Directors Guild of America began issuing mandatory safety bulletins regarding the handling of hazardous elements like animals, helicopters, and weapons. For its part, the Screen Actors Guild included clauses allowing any performer or technician to refuse a scene if they feel their life is in danger, without fear of contractual retaliation. Most importantly, California laws were tightened. It is now strictly forbidden for children to work at night or near dangerous effects without strict permits and the presence of child welfare tutors. But no single measure has been enough. Over the years, the negligence of other filmmakers has resulted in new fatal accidents, especially those involving weapons. These range from the fatal shooting of Brandon Lee during the filming of The Crow to the production of Rust, where Alec Baldwin unintentionally took the life of the cinematographer. The movie of Twilight Zone was born as a dream team's grand project, but it ultimately turned into a nightmare. The irresponsibility and arrogance of its star director resulted in the greatest tragedy ever to happen during a filming. As a result, we are left with a cursed film. And although Hollywood changed its rules, it continues to prove that it still hasn't truly learned its lesson. On September 11, 2001, Ben Stiller turned on the TV expecting to see something completely different.